The Forgotten Asylum, a haunted hospital tale. Chapter 1, The Job Offer. Dr. Emily Carter was a young psychiatrist, passionate about her work and eager to make a difference. When she received a mysterious job offer from Ravencroft Asylum, she was intrigued. The asylum, located in a remote part of the country, had been closed for decades after a series of scandals and unexplained deaths. The offer promised substantial pay and the opportunity to restore the asylum to its former glory. Despite the warnings from her colleagues and the unsettling rumors surrounding the place, Emily decided to accept. She packed her bags and headed to the desolate location, determined to breathe new life into the abandoned institution. Chapter 2, The Arrival. Emily's journey to Ravencroft was long and eerie. The road twisted through dense forests and empty fields, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. As she approached the asylum, a sense of unease settled over her. The building loomed in the distance, a hulking mass of stone and steel, its windows dark and empty. She parked her car and stood before the entrance, taking in the dilapidated facade. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a chill ran down her spine. With a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. The interior was just as bleak as the exterior. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. The reception area was cluttered with old files and broken furniture. Emily's footsteps echoed through the empty halls as she made her way to the administrator's office. Chapter 3, The Administrator. To her surprise, the office was occupied. A man in his 50s, with a gaunt face and piercing eyes, greeted her. He introduced himself as Mr. Warren, the asylum's administrator. His demeanor was cold and formal, and Emily felt an immediate distrust. "Welcome, Dr. Carter," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I trust your journey was uneventful." "Yes, thank you," Emily replied, trying to hide her discomfort. "I'm eager to get started." "The place needs a lot of work." Mr. Warren nodded. "Indeed. We have much to do. The patients will arrive next week, and we must be ready." Emily was taken aback. "Patients? I thought the asylum was closed." Mr. Warren's expression remained unreadable. "Ravencroft is being reopened under new management. Your task is to evaluate the patients and help them adjust. Some have been difficult." Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She resolved to stay vigilant and uncover the secrets of Ravencroft Asylum. Chapter 4, The Staff. Over the next few days, Emily met the small staff that had been hired to help run the asylum. There was Nurse Margaret, a stern woman in her 60s who had worked at Ravencroft before it closed. Her eyes held a haunted look, and she rarely spoke more than necessary. There was also Jacob, a young orderly who seemed nervous and jittery, always glancing over his shoulder. The staff lived in a small wing of the asylum that had been renovated for their use. The rest of the building remained in a state of disrepair, with dark, empty corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. Emily often felt as though she were being watched, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up whenever she ventured too far from the staff quarters. Chapter 5, The First Night. On her first night alone in the asylum, Emily struggled to sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the old windows, and the building creaked and groaned as if alive. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of unease. Around midnight, she heard a faint, rhythmic tapping sound. It seemed to be coming from the floor above. She tried to ignore it, but the sound grew louder and more insistent. Unable to bear it any longer, she grabbed a flashlight and ventured out into the dark hallways. The tapping led her to the old psychiatric ward, a place that had been sealed off for years. The door was ajar, and Emily's heart pounded as she pushed it open. The room was empty, but the tapping continued, now accompanied by faint whispers. Emily followed the sounds to a set of rusted iron stairs leading down to the basement. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air grew colder as she descended, the whispers growing louder. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a dark, damp corridor lined with cell-like rooms. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, and the tapping had turned into a steady, ominous beat. Emily felt a surge of fear but pressed on, determined to find the source. Chapter 6: The Encounter. As she walked deeper into the basement, Emily's flashlight revealed a figure standing at the end of the corridor. It was a young girl, no older than 10, dressed in a tattered hospital gown. Her eyes were hollow, and her skin was pale as death. "Who are you?" Emily called out, her voice trembling. The girl didn't respond. She simply turned and walked through a door at the end of the corridor. Emily hesitated but then followed, feeling compelled to understand what was happening. The door led to a small room with an old, rusty operating table in the center. The walls were covered in disturbing drawings and symbols, smeared in what looked like blood. The girl stood by the table, her gaze fixed on Emily. "They hurt us," she whispered, her voice echoing in the cold air. "They took our souls." Emily's blood ran cold. "Who did this to you?" "The doctors. The ones who came before. They're still here. Watching. Waiting." Before Emily could react, the girl vanished, leaving the room icy and silent. Emily's flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. She stumbled back to the stairs, her mind racing with fear and confusion. Chapter 7: The Research. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily spent the next few days delving into the asylum's history. She searched through old files, medical records, and newspaper articles. What she found was horrifying. Ravencroft Asylum had been a place of unspeakable experiments and cruelty. Dr. Victor Harlow, the head psychiatrist in the 1950s, had conducted brutal and inhumane experiments on the patients, believing he could cure mental illness through pain and fear. Many patients had died, and their restless spirits were said to haunt the asylum. Emily also discovered that Dr. Harlow had mysteriously disappeared, along with several of his staff, on the night the asylum closed. The bodies were never found, and the case remained unsolved. Chapter 8: The Spirits Awaken. As the days passed, the paranormal activity intensified. Emily began to see shadowy figures moving through the halls, hear disembodied voices, and feel cold spots in the air. The staff, too, seemed affected. Nurse Margaret became increasingly agitated, and Jacob's nervousness turned into outright fear. One night, Emily was awoken by a loud banging sound. She rushed out of her room to find the source and saw Jacob standing in the hallway, staring at the door to the old psychiatric ward. "It's them," he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "They're coming for us." Emily tried to calm him down, but he bolted down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness. She chased after him, calling his name, but he was gone. Desperate for answers, Emily returned to the basement, hoping to confront the spirits. As she descended the stairs, she felt a cold presence behind her. She turned to see the apparition of Dr. Harlow, his face twisted in a sinister grin. "You should have left, Dr. Carter," he hissed. "Now you belong to us." Chapter 9: The Final Stand. Emily knew she had to end the haunting once and for all. She gathered the remaining staff and explained her plan. They needed to perform a cleansing ritual to banish the spirits and break the curse on Ravencroft. With trembling hands, they prepared the ritual, gathering candles, sage, and holy water. As night fell, they began the ceremony in the old operating room where Emily had first seen the girl. The air grew thick with tension, and the spirits began to manifest. The ghostly figures of the patients appeared, their faces twisted in agony. Dr. Harlow's malevolent spirit loomed over them, his laughter echoing through the room. Emily led the ritual, chanting prayers and burning sage. The spirits screamed and writhed, trying to resist. The temperature dropped, and a fierce wind whipped through the room, extinguishing the candles. But Emily pressed on, her voice unwavering. She poured the holy water over the symbols on the walls, and a blinding light filled the room. The spirits let out one final, anguished wail before dissolving into the air. Chapter 10: The Aftermath. The asylum fell silent. The oppressive weight that had hung over the place was lifted, and the air felt lighter. The spirits were gone, and Ravencroft was finally at peace. Emily and the remaining staff emerged from the basement, exhausted but relieved. They decided to leave the asylum and never return, knowing that some places were better left forgotten. Years later, Emily published a book about her experiences at Ravencroft Asylum. It became a bestseller, a chilling account of the horrors she had faced and the bravery it took to confront them. The asylum itself was eventually demolished, the land left untouched as a memorial to those who had suffered there. Emily went on to have a successful career, but she never forgot the haunted halls of Ravencroft. The experience had changed her, making her more empathetic and determined to help those in need. She used her newfound fame to advocate for better mental health care and the humane treatment of patients. The story of Ravencroft Asylum became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the human soul and the power of courage and compassion to overcome it.
Don't forget to subscribe.